Welcome to NSG 229, Study Session 3, Developmental Theories 2. Introduction. You have learnt the key concepts and stages of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory, Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory, in the introductory aspects of this topic. In this study session, you will learn Sigmund Freud's psychosexual theory, spiritual theory, behavioral and social child development theories. Learning outcomes. At the end of the study session, you should be able to 1. Discuss the importance of various stages in Sigmund Freud's psychosexual theory. 2. Discuss the Albert's theory of moral development. 3. Discuss spiritual theory, behavioral and social child development theories. Sigmund Freud psychoanalytic or psychosexual development theories. The theories proposed by Sigmund Freud stressed the importance of childhood events and experiences, but almost exclusively focused on mental disorders rather than normal functioning. According to Freud, child development is described as a series of psychosexual stages. Freud outlined these stages as oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Each stage involves the satisfaction of a libidinal desire and can later play a role in adult personality. Personality is mostly established by the age of 5. Early experiences play a large role in personality development and continue to influence behavior later in life. Freud's theory of psychosexual development is one of the best known, but also one of the most controversial. Freud believed that personality develops through a series of childhood stages, during which the pleasure-seeking energies of the child becomes focused on certain erogenous areas. This psychosexual energy or libido was described as the driving force behind behavior. If these psychosexual stages are completed successfully, the result is a healthy personality. If certain issues are not resolved at the appropriate stage, fixation can occur. A fixation is a persistent focus on an early psychosexual stage. Until this conflict is resolved, the individual will remain stuck in this stage. For example, a person who is fixated at the oral stage may be over-dependent on others and may seek oral stimulation through smoking, drinking, or eating. Freud noted that at different times in our lives, different parts of our skin give us greatest pleasure. Later theorists would call these areas erogenous zones. It appeared to Freud that the infant found its greatest pleasure in sucking, especially at the breast. Infants, babies have a penchant for bringing nearly everything in their environment into contact with their mouth. A bit later in life, the child focuses on the anal pleasures of holding it in and letting go. By 3 or 4, the child may have discovered the pleasure of touching or rubbing against his or her genitalia. Only later, in our sexual maturity, do we find our greatest pleasure in sexual intercourse. In these observations, Freud had the makings of a psychosexual stage theory. Stages of psychosexual theory. The oral stage lasts from birth to about 18 months. The focus of pleasure is, of course, the mouth. Sucking and biting are favorite activities. The anal stage lasts from about 18 months to 3 or 4 years old. The focus of pleasure is the anus. Holding it in and letting it go are greatly enjoyed. The phallic stage lasts from 3 or 4 to 5, 6 or 7 years old. The focus of pleasure is the genitalia. Masturbation is common. The latent stage lasts from 5, 6 or 7 to puberty, that is, somewhere around 12 years old. During this stage, Freud believed that the sexual impulse was suppressed in the service of learning. It is important to note that while most children seem to be fairly calm sexually during their grammar school years, perhaps up to a quarter of them are quite busy masturbating and playing doctor. In Freud's repressive era, these children were at least quieter than their modern counterparts. The genital stage begins at puberty and represents the resurgence of the sex drive in adolescence and the more specific focusing of pleasure in sexual intercourse. Freud felt that masturbation, oral sex, homosexuality, and many other things we find acceptable in adulthood today were immature. Kohlberg's theory of moral development. 3.2 Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Lawrence Kohlberg, 1927 to 1987, focused on moral reasoning, or why people think the way they do about right and wrong. He was influenced by Piaget, who believed that moral reasoning depends on the level of cognitive development. Levels of moral development. 3.2.1 Levels of moral development. Kohlberg proposed that people pass through 3 levels of moral development. He divided each level into 2 stages. Level 1, the pre-conventional level. At this level, children ascribe great importance to the authority of adults. For children in the first stage of this level, an action is wrong if it's punished, whereas in the second stage, an action is right if it's rewarded. Level 2, the conventional level. In the second level, children value rules which they follow in order to get approval from others. In the first stage of this level, children want the approval only of people who are close to them. In the second stage, children become more concerned with the rules of the broader society. Level 3, the post-conventional level. In the final level, people become more flexible and consider what's personally important to them. In the first stage of this level, people still want to follow society's rules, but they don't see those rules as absolute. In the second stage, people figure out right and wrong for themselves, based on abstract ethical principles. Only a small proportion of people reach this last stage of moral reasoning. Subdivision of the levels in Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Level 1. Pre-conventional. 2. Conventional. 3. Post-conventional. Stage 1. What determines right and wrong? Punishment by adults. 2. Reward by adults. 3. Rules set by close people. 4. Rules set by society. 5. Rules set by society judged by what is personally important. 6. Rules based on abstract ethical principles. 3.3 Spiritual theories. Spiritual theories deals with the understanding of the relationship with the universe and the perception of about the direction and meaning of life. James Fowler describes the development of faith as a force that gives meaning to a person's life. He is best known for his book Stages of Faith, published in 1981, in which he sought to develop the idea of a developmental process in human faith. These stages of faith development were along the lines of Jim Piaget's theory of cognitive development and Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development. Description of the stages. Stage 0, primal or undifferentiated faith, birth to 2 years, is characterized by an early learning of the safety of their environment, that is, warm, safe, and secure, versus hot, neglect, and abuse. If consistent nurture is experienced, one will develop a sense of trust and safety about the universe and the divine. Conversely, negative experiences will cause one to develop distrust with the universe and the divine. Transition to the next stage begins with integration of thought and languages, which facilitates the use of symbols in speech and play. Stage 1. Intuitive projective faith, ages of 3 to 7, is characterized by the psyche's unprotected exposure to the unconscious and marked by relative flexibility of thought patterns. Religion is learned mainly through experiences, stories, images, and the people that one comes in contact with. Stage 2. Mythic literal faith, mostly in school children. Stage 2 persons have a strong belief in the justice and reciprocity of the universe, and their deities have human characteristics. During this time, metaphors and symbolic language are often misunderstood and are taken literally. Stage 3. Synthetic conventional faith arising in adolescence, aged 12 to adulthood, characterized by conformity to religious authority and the development of a personal identity. Any conflicts with one's beliefs are ignored at this stage due to the fear of threat from inconsistencies. Stage 4. Individuative reflective faith, usually mid-20s to late 30s, a stage of trouble and struggle. The individual takes personal responsibility for his or her beliefs and feelings. As one is able to reflect on one's own beliefs, there is openness to a new complexity of faith, but this also increases the awareness of conflict in one's belief. Stage 5. Conjunctive faith, midlife crisis, acknowledges paradox and transcendence, relating reality behind the symbols of inherited systems. The individual resolves conflicts from previous stages by a complex understanding of a multidimensional, interdependent truth that cannot be explained by any particular statement. Interdependent truth that cannot be explained by any particular statement. Stage 6. Universalizing faith, or what some might call enlightenment. The individual would treat any person with compassion as he or she views people as from a universal community and should be treated with universal principles of love and justice. Behavioral child development theories. 3.4. Behavioral child development theories. Behavioral theories of child development focus on how environmental interaction influences behavior and are based upon the theories of theorists such as John B. Watson, Ivan Pavlov, and B. F. Skinner. These theories deal only with observable behaviors. Development is considered a reaction to rewards, punishment, stimuli, and reinforcement. Three point 4.1. Classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is a type of learning that had a major influence on the school of thought in psychology known as behaviorism, which is based on the assumption that learning occurs through interactions with the environment. Classical conditioning was discovered by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. Classical conditioning is a learning process that occurs through associations between an environmental stimulus and a naturally occurring stimulus. The unconditioned stimulus, UCS. The unconditioned stimulus is one that unconditionally, naturally, and automatically triggers a response. Unconditioned response. For example, when you smell one of your favorite foods, you may immediately feel very hungry. In this example, the smell of the food is the unconditioned stimulus. The unconditioned response, UCR. The unconditioned response is the unlearned response that occurs naturally in response to the unconditioned stimulus. In our example, the feeling of hunger in response to the smell of food is the unconditioned response. Phase 2. During conditioning. During the second phase of the classical conditioning process, the previously neutral stimulus is repeatedly paired with the unconditioned stimulus. As a result of this pairing, an association between the previously neutral stimulus and the UCS is formed. At this point, the neutral stimuli become known as the conditioned stimulus, CS. The conditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus is previously neutral stimulus that, after becoming associated with the unconditioned stimulus, eventually comes to trigger a conditioned response. In our early example, suppose that when you smelled your favorite food, you also heard the sound of a whistle, while the whistle is unrelated to the smell of the food. If the sound of the whistle was paired multiple times with the smell, the sound would eventually trigger the conditioned response. In this case, the sound of the whistle is the conditioned stimulus. Phase 3. After conditioning. Once the association has been made between the UCS and the CS, presenting the conditioned stimulus alone will come to evoke a response even in the absence of the unconditioned stimulus. The resulting response is known as the conditioned response, CR. The conditioned response. The conditioned response is the learned response to the previously neutral stimulus. In our example, the conditioned response would be feeling hungry when you heard the sound of the whistle. Operant conditioning. 3.4.2. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, sometimes referred to as instrumental conditioning, is a method of learning that occurs through rewards and punishment for behavior. Operant conditioning was coined by behaviorist B.F. Skinner. Through operant conditioning, an association is made between a behavior and a consequence for that behavior. For example, when a lab rat presses a blue button, it receives a food pellet as a reward. But when it presses the red button, it receives a mild electric shock. As a result, it learns to press the blue button but avoid the red button. Components of operant conditioning. Some key concepts in operant conditioning. Reinforcement is any event that strengthens or increases the behavior it follows. There are two kinds of reinforcers. 1. Positive reinforcers are favorable events or outcomes that are presented after the behavior. In situations that reflect positive reinforcement, a response or behavior is strengthened by the addition of something, such as praise or a direct reward. 2. Negative reinforcers involve the removal of an unfavorable event or outcomes after the display of a behavior. In these situations, a response is strengthened by the removal of something considered unpleasant. In both of these cases of reinforcement, the behavior increases. Punishment, on the other hand, is the presentation of an adverse event or an outcome that causes a decrease in the behavior it follows. There are two kinds of punishment. 1. Positive punishment, sometimes referred to as punishment by application, involves the presentation of an unfavorable event or outcome in order to weaken the response it follows. 2. Negative punishment, also known as punishment by removal, occurs when a favorable event or outcome is removed after a behavior occurs. Social child development theories. Social development theory explains how socialization affects the learning process in an individual. It tries to explain consciousness or awareness as the result of socialization. Unlike behavioral theories, Bandura believed that external reinforcement was not the only way that people learned new things. Instead, core reinforcement, such as a sense of pride, satisfaction, and accomplishment, could also lead to learning. By observing the actions of others, including parents and peers, children develop new skills and acquire new information. Lev Vygotsky. Another psychologist named Lev Vygotsky proposed a similar learning theory that has gone on to become very influential, especially in the field of education. Like Piaget, Vygotsky believed that children learn actively and through hands-on experiences. His sociocultural theory also suggested that parents, caregivers, peers, and the culture at large were responsible for the development of higher order functions. Summary 1. Freud's theory of psychosexual development is one of the best known, but also one of the most controversial. Freud believed that personality develops through a series of childhood stages, during which the pleasure-seeking energies of the child becomes focused on certain erogenous areas. This psychosexual energy or libido was described as the driving force behind behavior. 2. Kohlberg's theory of moral development focused on moral reasoning, or why people think the way they do about right and wrong. It was influenced by Piaget, who believed that moral reasoning depends on the level of cognitive development. Kohlberg proposed that people pass through 3 levels of moral development, namely the pre-conventional level, the conventional level, and the post-conventional level. 3. Spiritual theories deal with the understanding of their relationship with the universe and their perception about the direction and meaning of life. Behavioral child development theories. Behavioral theories of child development focus on how environmental interaction influences behavior. Social development theory believes that early relationships with caregivers play a major role in child development. Behavioral theories of child development focus on how environmental interaction influences behavior and are based upon the theories of theorists, such as classical conditioning by Ivan Pavlov and operant conditioning was coined by behaviorist B.F. Skinner. These theories deal only with observable behaviors. 5. Social development theory explains how socialization affects the learning process in an individual. It tries to explain consciousness or awareness as a result of socialization. John Bowlby, Albert Bandura, Lev Vygotsky are strong proponents of the social child development theory. End of study session 3. Thanks for listening.